Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning once again and welcome. It is my honor to guide us through this high-level public seminar as we reflect this morning on Africa's agency in a world undergoing profound transformation and the role of our institutions in shaping a resilient and future-ready continent. Before we proceed, please allow me to acknowledge something very important. You will notice that here on the podium, our panel is composed entirely of men. This is not deliberate, nor does it diminish the immense leadership and expertise of women who drive peace, governance, and multilateral engagement across our continent every single day. Instead, it reminds us of the work that remains to ensure stronger gender balance in strategic spaces. The African Union, through its Women, Peace and Security agenda and broader gender architecture, remains committed to elevating women's leadership. And today, we see this call to action to widen the pipeline and strengthen representation at all levels is even more critical. Today's seminar also coincides with the 30th anniversary of the Training for Peace program, a partnership that has worked alongside the African Union for 3 decades. So for 3 decades tells us that we were there during the OAU, and we have accompanied the African Union until today. I will not go into detail, as Ambassador Christensen will speak to this shortly, but allow me to acknowledge TFP's long-standing support to the AU's peace, security, and governance work, and its continued contribution to strengthening African capacities. With that important reflection, and with appreciation to our partners, we are privileged to have an exceptional group of leaders whose strategic insights and decades of experience will enrich our dialogue today. With your permission, I will now introduce our distinguished hosts and speakers. Our co-hosts for today's high-level public seminar are Ambassadors Bankole Adeoye, the Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security of the African Union, and Ambassador Sten Christensen, Norway's ambassador to Ethiopia and Djibouti, and permanent representative to the African Union, IGAD and UNECA. His Excellency Ambassador Bankole Adeoye, who most of you gathered here already know and needs no introduction actually, is the African Union's Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, and the first to lead the merged governance, peace and security portfolios since 2021. He previously served as Nigeria's permanent representative to the AU and UNECA and ambassador to Ethiopia and Djibouti. His distinguished career includes senior leadership roles at NEPAD, as well as director-level positions within Nigeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Adeoye brings extensive experience in diplomacy, governance, and multilateral coordination, and continues to steer the African Union's peace and security architecture during a critical period of continental transformation. You are welcome, sir. His Excellency Ambassador Sten Christensen is the ambassador of the Kingdom of Norway to Ethiopia and Djibouti, and Norway's permanent representative to the African Union, IGAD and UNECA, as I mentioned earlier. A career diplomat with over 20 years of experience, he has served in senior policy roles within Norway's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including as Deputy Director General. He previously served as Ministerial Counselor at the Norwegian Embassy in Nairobi. Ambassador Christensen brings deep expertise in governance, international relations, peace and security cooperation, and multilateral diplomacy. He currently leads one of Norway's key diplomatic missions, shaping a strong and principled Africa-Norway partnership. Thank you for coming, Your Excellency. Mr. Pafe Onanga Anyanga, the Special Representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations Secretary General to the African Union and Head of the United Nations Office to the African Union. With more than 25 years of experience across the United Nations system, he has served in senior leadership roles in the Central African Republic, Burundi, and the Horn of Africa. His career includes service as Director of the Office of the UN Deputy Secretary General and as Special Advisor in successive General Assembly presidencies. Before joining the UN, he was a diplomat in Gabon's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, rising to the rank of ambassador. We thank you very much for joining us, sir. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I will give the floor to Ambassador Bankole Adeoye to welcome all of us to today's program.
Thank you, Dr. Linda. And I believe by fiat we can accept you as a distinguished panelist so that we can have a gender balance. Excellencies, distinguished ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very privileged on behalf of the Commission to be associated with this high-level public seminar. It's a topic and a theme that we love to discuss for a number of reasons. We are at a very strategic moment in African history. Globally, we are also witnessing unprecedented shocks and shifts. I will be speaking to three critical areas as I welcome you: a world in transition, Africa's agency, that is a strategic necessity, AU's response, given its mandate, the shifting global order, and why this dialogue matters. I will be glad to join you because I know my dear brother, Dr. Vasu, will be leading the debate. The global landscape is experiencing profound and structural shifts. I repeat, profound, unprecedented structural shifts. The post-Cold War era is giving way to what we did not bargain for. Multilateralism is being shaped in a different manner. The risk, the threats are enormous. Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim, former Secretary General of the Organization of African Unity, reminded us once that African response to global change are also moments of uncertainty, but also moments of opportunity for renewal. What opportunities do we have or see? Can the African Union or our partners remain passive observers? Africa's agency is no longer aspirational. It is fundamental. The Gen Z population, expanding opportunities in investment, wherewithal, the global diplomatic leverage. Africa believes in a rich multilateral engagement. Africa wants to be a central actor. But our institutions are the fit for purpose. Our department depends on many of our partners in this room because our budget is only funded 10%, less than 10% by member states. So how can we focus and act in the leadership role to bring peace and make peace and build peace? We know our mandate, and I will end with that later on Agenda 2063. We know the norms like none globally. No intergovernmental diplomatic organization has a zero tolerance for unconstitutional changes of government. None has built a peace-building architecture as much as the AU. But these complex conflict drivers distort our goal for the Africa we want, not to talk of the SDGs. So this dialogue matters today because we are living in a transformative world, and our task is to reflect on the global transitions, how they impact our aspirations. Training for peace, in particular, is a partnership that we cherish, given it is anchored in African priorities. And I believe many in this room who partner with us, particularly the EU, Norway, and individual countries of the Nordic countries, see us as having the capacity to wave through this transition and come up with our heads high. We must continue to advance gender-responsive tools. We must promote youth inclusion. In 2026, we have decided that one factor that we will be doing in our department is to mainstream youth inclusion, irrespective of the overall AU theme, to mainstream youth inclusion in every aspect of our intervention. We must seize this opportunity, even in a time of uncertainty. Our norms, our values, our power alignments are shifting in real time. This means that our positions must be clearer, not only on internal continental governance, where we promote democracy and good governance, but also globally, particularly the international financial architecture and the UN Security Council reform. Africa's global diplomatic footprint is all about equality, sustainability, and most importantly, the peace dividends we cherish. Let me end by encouraging you to commend TFP, Training for Peace program, for giving us this opportunity after 30 years of very cherished partnership. Africa's voice is indispensable to the needs of today. With clarity, with confidence, and unity of purpose, we can make a difference. But to my dear friend, Dr. Vasu, I would like to ask you, as you move into your session, which I'll be privileged to wait, there will be 4 asks. The first is that, but let me give the context. The African Union Agenda 2063 aspires in number 7, aspiration, a strong, united, resilient, influential player. And this is about the shifts we are seeing today. To 2063, 38 years, about 38 years to go. The first ask is that, can we be strong in the midst of internal strife? Threats of unimaginable proportion. Political violence resulting from elections or disputes internally. What sort of Africa can be strong when internally we are weak? The second ask is that we're supposed to be united according to Agenda 2063 in the global order. Can we remain united when we are obviously more divided, more interstate competition, more or less of Pan-African solidarity that is declining, that is waning? The third ask is about resilience. Agenda 2063 talks of an Africa that is resilient player globally. How can we be resilient when we are not responding to the shocks of climate change easily? How can we be resilient when many of our communities are fragile? And finally, the fourth ask: how can we be influential when we are perpetually, and you may quote me, chronically dependent on partners? I'm sorry, Dr. Basu, I changed your session, but I really want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I believe very strongly in this union that aspires to be strong, to be united, to be resilient, and to be an influential player. But the challenges are enormous. We cannot do it alone. We are expanding our network of partnerships. Not just the traditional RECs, regional mechanisms, or external partners, but civil society. Yesterday, we engaged with PANPAPS, a civil society umbrella created to work with PAPS. We've set up a network of think tanks for peace. We have established the inter-regional knowledge exchange on conflict prevention and early warning with the RECs. But we need more action on the ground. And once again, I want to assure you that our goal is to work with all to make peace happen, to build peace, and to assure ourselves that Africa can become that influential player and contributor to global peace. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Commissioner. May I invite you, Your Excellency Christensen, to give us your remarks.
Thank you very much. Excellency Commissioner Bankole, Excellency SRSG Parfait, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first just comment that I cannot change my gender either, I'm afraid, but that I'm he for she. We're entering the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and I am very much committed to that. And that almost 50% of my colleagues, ambassadors in the Norwegian Foreign Service, are women, so it could have been a woman. Happens not to be. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to join you today as we celebrate 30 years of the Training for Peace program, one of the most enduring and impactful partnerships in Africa's peace and security landscape. This milestone reflects not only the longevity of a program, but more importantly, the resilience of a partnership built on trust, shared values, and a deep commitment to African agency. Just a brief reflection on TFP as it's 30 years. It's a partnership to which really an impressive number of my colleagues in the ministry back home and across the world feel an ownership. And I cannot count the number of Norwegian colleagues I've met who at one point or other worked on TFP and who feel very strongly about its importance. So I have many supporters back home. We are, to state by now, it's almost a cliche already. This is a time of profound global transformation. The international order is being reshaped by geopolitical tensions, shifting alliances, technological disruption, and widening global inequalities. Multilateralism, once the anchor of collective action, is massively challenged. Conflicts are more complex, driven by a convergence of governance failures, violent extremism, climate fragility, demographic pressures, and transnational criminal economies. The world as we political scientists felt we knew it is gone. It's a bit as if the rules of the game have been torn up and we're scrambling to see if there are new ones. At present, I'm not sure I like what I see. These trends underscore a simple but powerful reality. Africa's voice, leadership, and agency are more important than ever for building a more stable and resilient, and I could add, more fair global order. And Africa's continental institutions, especially the African Union, must be equipped to anticipate, prepare for, and respond effectively to the new and emerging threats, reshaping the security landscape. If the global system is breaking apart, we must build it from the regions and up. As the song goes, it's time for Africa. This is exactly why the Training for Peace program remains so relevant today. For 3 decades, TFP has demonstrated what long-term principled partnerships can achieve in strengthening Africa's peace and security institutions. The origins of TFP lie in a visionary political conversation between 2 transformative leaders, President Nelson Mandela and former Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland. Emerging from the seismic political changes of the mid-90s, they recognized a critical need to support Africa in taking greater responsibility for its peace and security challenges by strengthening local knowledge, institutions, and leadership. From those early conversations, TFP emerged as a mechanism that combined African institutional leadership with Norway's long-term political and financial support and the analytical depth of a northern research partner. It was designed not as a short-term technical project, but as a sustained partnership capable of evolving with the continent's needs. Today, the program is implemented by Accord, the Institute for Security Studies, ISS, and the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. Together, they bring grounded African experience, global comparative insight, and strong analytical capacity, qualities that have made TFP a trusted partner of the African Union for 3 decades. TFP's history mirrors Africa's own institutional evolution. At every major moment of transition, the program has provided steady, adaptive, and evidence-based support to the AU. Even before the AU was established, TFP anticipated the shift towards multidimensional peace operations. As intrastate conflicts increased on the continent, TFP played a key role in conceptualizing the role of civilians and police in peace operations, at a time when such deployments were still viewed almost exclusively through a military lens. These early foundations shaped the AU's emerging peace and security vision. As APSA structures took shape in the early 2000s, TFP aligned its work to provide doctrine, training, and operational support. It helped the AU develop the frameworks and deployable capacities needed for effective peace operations. Crucially, TFP acted as a bridge between policy and practice, ensuring that AU guidance reflected real mission environments, not abstract theory. TFP accompanied the AU during some of its most complex mission transitions, the transition from AMISOM to ATMIS and now AU-SOM, and the growing emphasis on stabilization approaches across conflict-affected regions. In each case, the program ensured continuity of institutional memory and strengthened the AU's ability to make evidence-based decisions. Its role in supporting the Police Strategic Support Group, refining guidance documents, and improving readiness processes has been indispensable. TFP recognized early that Africa's security challenges cannot be separated from governance and development. It supported initiatives under the African governance architecture, contributed to the development of the Continental Youth, Peace and Security Framework, strengthened women's participation in peace processes, and played a central role in reviewing the post-conflict reconstruction and development policy. Through this work, the program helped position governance, inclusion, and stabilization as interconnected pillars essential for sustainable peace. One of the TFP's most significant contributions has been its work in strengthening AU institutions, ensuring they are capable not only of responding to crises, but of preparing for the future. The program supported the development of major AU guidance frameworks, the Peace Support Operations Doctrine, Capabilities Generation Guidelines, the AU Child Protection Policy, gender-responsive reporting toolkits for the Peace and Security Council, and technical guidance for regional mechanisms. This body of work has enabled the AU to standardize practice, improve coherence, and adapt to evolving operational demands. TFP's long-standing support to the police and civilian dimensions of peace operations is among its most visible achievements. The transition of the African Standby Capacity Roster from the Center for International Peace Operations, ZIF, to the TFP reflects the trust placed in the program's ability to steward complex systems essential for rapid deployment. TFP has been instrumental in strengthening the AU's knowledge management systems, including the development of the PAPS digital repository, which has modernized document handling, enhanced confidentiality, and reduced environmental impact. Through its dual-track research strategy, policy briefs for decision makers, and academic publications for scholars, TFP has ensured that evidence guides policy and that African experiences shape global debates. TFP's convening capacity is one of its most unique strengths. For 30 years, it has created trusted spaces where AU divisions, RECs, RMs, and partners can deliberate on sensitive issues, from financing peace operations to aligning stabilization strategies and strengthening internal coordination. This convening power has been invaluable at a time when fragmentation threatens collective action. The durability of TFP lies in its ability to respond to AU's evolving needs while maintaining continuity, institutional memory, and strategic focus. The program has adapted through leadership changes, restructuring processes, shifting peacekeeping mandates, and the emergence of new threats. This is the essence of true partnership: flexibility, mutual learning, trust, and a commitment to African priorities. As the global order continues to shift, Africa's strategic importance will only grow. Its demographic weight, economic potential, technological innovation, and diplomatic leadership position it as a key actor in shaping the future of multilateralism. To respond to this moment, the next phase of TFP's work will be essential. Norway remains committed to this partnership because Africa's peace and security is integral to global peace and security. As we celebrate this 30-year milestone, let us honor the vision that launched this program, the institution that sustained it, and the many individuals who have built and shaped it. Norway is proud to have walked this journey with you and remain committed for the road ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. A trusted partner indeed. And yes, Your Excellency Parfait, please, you've got the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator, and let me join the previous speakers to claim and state loudly that I am also a strong he for she. And as I say this, I want to recall my boss, UN Secretary Antonio Guterres, when he got elected. And you may recall at that time, there was a strong expectation that the time had maybe come for a woman to lead the UN. I guess this is a conversation that is ongoing. But the SG then responded that I may not be a woman, but I will be a strong feminist. And let me say this, he has delivered on that commitment. As we stand, the senior leadership of the UN is about 51% composed of outstanding women leaders, including many of them from this continent. So, but let me thank you, Commissioner Bankole, and my dear friend Stian, Ambassador of Norway, for kindly inviting UNOAU to join you this morning at this important event. And Ambassador Bankole has been so provocative that he has made me reflect twice and recalibrate my own comment and follow on his tone to put so much more weight on the shoulders of the next panelist. To say this, Stian, thank you so much. We cannot underline how much your support, Norway's strong partnership to promote knowledge-based decision-making on the continent is absolutely invaluable. That's why I have an issue with my friends, and they know me, and they have heard me say this a few times. Paul Simon, I see Dr. Solomon, my dear brother Vasu. I have always been making the case that to some extent, you guys have failed our leaders. No, let me say this, I will be nicer. The point I'm making is, I am still wanting and waiting to see when are you, the scholars, going to make the case for Africa's unity and regional integration palatable to the leaders? Because it looks, as Ambassador Bankole has stated it, so clearly, that cause has lost steam at a time when it's much needed. So, political leaders have no time to go and do the important work that you carry. But they need to know, why should they stop focusing on some of them, tiny countries, hoping to help Africa leapfrog to the next or the current century with stronger agency, if they don't have something that convinces them that working with others will add up and that they will win something beyond the Agenda 2063 and all the moonshots. Where is the paper? Where is the convincing act that will make them understand once and for all that 1 is stronger than 54. This is where I cannot but just ask you to help leaders make the difficult political decision to go for integration as an existential, life-threatening or life-saving option, that there are none other. And that's why I sit in this room, and in 2 days, I will be going to join Commissioner Bankole and world leaders, and my boss has asked me to go to the EU-AU summit meeting in Luanda. And where I say to Europeans, you have done something good. And I will not mention the name of that commissioner here at the AUC, telling me, Parfait, the difference between us and our colleagues, the European commissioners, is that when they go to any setting, they indeed speak for the entire European Union. They are empowered to make decisions that will commit the entire European Union. This is the one that is stronger than 27. This is the one that would be stronger than 54 that seems to be missing as we speak. And thank you, Commissioner Bankole, for allowing us to enter into that kind of, how to call it, in those deep waters. But you are absolutely right, and thank you for making this possible. Now, as I look at the title of today's conversation, the first question that comes to mind is to ask ourselves, following on of Commissioner Bankole, is Africa charting its own destiny as we speak today? My answer is yes, because I am a stubborn optimist. As the late Desmond Tutu used to put it, I am, like him, a prisoner of hope. But if not, which are the forces at work, both internal, issues of conflict, and external, that are obstructing the continent's agency? In other words, what would it take for Africa to be the sole or the main agent of its own future? So I'm adding a few more questions. And if non-African agents are still at work in influencing or dictating the continent's trajectory, what forces, means, or kind of power are they applying to determine Africa's fate? If, as it may be the case, such forces are jostling for global power, is Africa equipped to take advantage of their conflicting interests? So, to make global power competition an opportunity for Africa, is Africa capable of doing it? Or would the continent continue to be just a battleground? The grass trampled by fighting pachyderms. I will not attempt to answer these and other questions, as we are truly indeed gifted to have such an eminent panel of scholars, double with unquestionable Pan-African credentials. Suffice for me to stress that for a continent that was absent at creation, and I'm seeing Ambassador Hirut in the room, I'm not suggesting that indeed Ethiopia was not among the founding, the forebearers of the UN. What I'm saying is Africa cannot afford to leave it to others to redraw the emerging new distribution of power, because it's about power and roles. I say absent for lacking the critical mass to influence for its own benefits the policies and normative frames that have been serving for over 80 years as the basis for the global political, economic, financial, military, and technological trajectory of world affairs. This is what I meant by absent. Yet, as we all agree that the world is indeed in flux and more fragmented, mainly because what I have come to call the San Francisco's consensus no longer serve its intended purpose in the eyes of dominant powers, we should guard from believing that the fundamentals of the new power equilibrium that is in the making will be drastically different from the prevailing ones. The emerging new world order is likely to be a measure of the capacity of major blocs, states, and other entities, including major corporations, to ascertain their agency in the evolving global power redistribution. The question before us today, therefore, may be, will Africa be ready, or what would it take for the continent to influence and count in the emerging global order power distribution? Dear friends, I dare raising these questions because I know Africa is not coming to this conversation void of any options. The news of the end of the global justice and the end of sustainable development is a forewarning of emerging global challenges. But as the universalism, the democratic and development ideals of the AU Constitutive Act, and the AU Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance being defeated? I don't think so. I think Commissioner Bankole answered that question. Are AU injunctions against unconstitutional changes of government or AU imperatives for good democratic governance suddenly passé? I don't think so. Or are African aspirations for unity, promising a global role for African agency, gone? Commissioner Bankole has strong doubts. I share them. Have we sacrificed the values of continental unity, or on the altar of global power privilege, or do enlightened collective ideals or universal rights of recognition and redistribution enshrined in the UN Charter still have a seat at the global table? Today, thanks to its forward-leaning and ambitious normative frameworks currently under review, the AU is unquestionably a bastion of multilateralism and a home to universalist and democratic ambitions. ABSA and AGA present a vision not only for a just African order, but also a just world order. However, Africa alone and/or Africa divided cannot achieve its ambitions. The fact that the implementation remains a daunting challenge, and I know that my brother Juan will remind us that, should not be a reason for despair, but rather a reminder of the imperative to forge ahead with greater impetus. The UN-AU Joint Framework for Enhanced Partnership in Peace and Security, the UN-AU Strategic Partnership for the Implementation of the UN Agenda 2030 and the AU Agenda 2063, and the UN-AU Human Rights Framework exemplify democratic and development values and present a model for a network multilateral system called for by Secretary General Guterres and Chairperson Yusuf. Now, whether as a matter of polarization, particularism, or pluralism, global competition is heightening, not lowering, as evidenced by this year's convention of the G7 in Canada, or the International Conference on Financing for Development in Spain, to mention just a few intergovernmental processes. Likewise, global competition is currently on display in Belém, in Brazil, and will certainly be palpable during the upcoming G20 meeting in South Africa, where the African Union will take its seat for the first time. Will Africa position itself to negotiate collective interests amidst this prolific and plural competition, or will African countries get picked off one by one? This is the question. Dear friend, with a proliferation of external actors in increasingly protracted African conflict and a proliferation of external actors in their resolution, there is admittedly ground for concern. However, the agenda for sustainable development with a focus on international economic and financial reforms, including AU Agenda 2063, the agenda for global social justice and a just green transition being discussed currently in Belém, and the agenda for multilateral internationalism, where small and big states share decision-making powers, including, indeed, a seat in the UN Security Council. These agendas remain alive in AU and UN relations. I will be closing soon. Indeed, with the support of the AU, the UN member state endorsed such a vision in the Pact for the Future. You may remember the role played by the African group in New York. These values were reaffirmed recently at the UN HQ, where Commissioner Bankole and myself were privileged to witness the 9th annual conference of the UN Secretary General and the AU Commissioner, the AU Commission Chairperson. So we are certainly witnessing the move towards a multipolar world and consequently need a more robust multilateral framework to address emerging challenges. The Pact for the Future offers a path to strengthen multilateral approaches to peace and security and represents a key step towards more effective, inclusive, and network multilateralism. In this context of network multilateralism, the AU-UN partnership is by no means the only venue for African agencies. Alongside the G20, the AU can look to other global blocs, including not only ASEAN or the League of Arab States or the Organization of American States, and if united around key strategic interests as outlined in Agenda 2063 and related moonshots, the AU can enter into mutually beneficial partnerships with other major players such as the US, China, the Russian Federation, or the EU, but also mid-level powers using capital to leverage power in the world today. But the fact is, power and prestige continue to play an oversight role in international relations. Africa's power resides in African unity, its vibrant people, particularly its dynamic youth, and of course, its immense endowment in strategic minerals. African prestige relies on Africa's ability to discriminate its interests from those of its partners and competitors. For Africa, and this is really an essential point, by virtue of the many tragedies that marked its history over the past several centuries, unity and regional integration should not be treated as optional, rather as an existential and strategic imperative. And as history has shown since immemorial times, nations that have invested in their human capital and mastered science and technology have often been better equipped to create wealth and amass capital, which in turn have enabled them to establish strong institutions underpinned by respect for the rule of law and human rights. To succeed, Africa's renaissance, as enshrined in Agenda 2063, will be no exception. While the Secretary General stresses the need for a global order that works for everyone, Africa can seize this moment to truly own African values and to assert African interest. I agree with you, my dear Stian. The time has come for Africa to decide. And of course, Africa can always count on the UN to stand by his side.
Thank you very, very much, SRSG Parfait. We should not despair, but be encouraged. And I hope that our keynote speaker will give us some pathways to this hope. And so on that note, may I welcome Mr. El Gassim Wan, our keynote speaker for today, who brings to this conversation over 3 decades of leadership experience in peace, security, and governance at both the African Union and the United Nations. He most recently served as the Special Representative of the Secretary General and head of MINUSMA in Mali, and was previously an Assistant Secretary General for UN peacekeeping operations at the UN. At the AU, he held several senior roles, including Chief of Staff and Chief Advisor to the Chairperson of the AUC, and at one point was the Director of the Peace and Security Department. He is currently a visiting Senior Research Fellow at the King's College London's African Leadership Center, and previously taught at George Washington University. His expertise continues to shape global and continental thinking on peace operations and multilateral governance. And in 2012, Mr. Wan was featured by the Africa Report as one of the 50 most influential Africans. Mr. Wan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Linda. I'm grateful to the AU, and in particular to Commissioner Bankole and his colleagues in the department, as well as to the Training for Peace program for giving me the opportunity to reflect with you on how Africa can strengthen its role in conflict management and resolution. More specifically, the issue is about how our continent can reclaim the central role envisioned at the founding of the African Union, and how it can creatively do so given the host of political, geopolitical, and financial constraints facing it, some of which cannot simply be wished away. I am convinced that Africa's ability to navigate today's shifting global landscape and to seize the opportunities it offers depends largely on how effectively we deal with the conflict and crisis on our continent. I will begin with a brief, necessarily incomplete snapshot of the current situation. From there, I will highlight the assets Africa already has at its disposal, I will then offer some practical ideas on how we can reclaim a central strategic role in shaping peace efforts on our continent. And I will end by underscoring why this agenda matters even more at a time when the international order itself is being reshaped. With that framing, let me turn to the current landscape. And here I suspect we all come into this room with a shared understanding. The situation is dire. One doesn't need to look far. Sudan alone is a tragedy of such magnitude that it should shake the conscience of the entire world. The South Sudan peace process, long at a standstill, is now at a risk of complete collapse. Add to that the Sahel, where the security situation continues to deteriorate amid open-ended transitions and shrinking political space. Or the Great Lakes region, where long-standing tensions are yet to be sustainably resolved, not to speak of Congo's own domestic problems. These are not abstract crises. They are realities experienced daily by African people through death, displacement, destitution, and human rights violations. On the governance side, the picture is just as sobering. Nation building and democratization were always going to be difficult given our history, the violent legacy of colonial rule, and in parts of the continent, minority rule, followed by decades of single-party systems. But today, the warning signs are unmistakable. The recent wave of unconscious changes of government and the deficiencies that continue to mar electoral processes are among the clearest reminders of the long road still ahead of us. And we know from experience that weak governance sits at the very heart of many of our peace and security crises. All of this is happening at a moment when global tensions are rising and geopolitical competition is playing out more visibly on our continent. Many partners are increasing their engagement in African crisis. And to be fair, some of these efforts have produced results, and several partners make an effort to involve the AU and work with regional actors. But we also know that when engagement happens outside multilateral frameworks, when it takes place through bilateral channels or ad hoc arrangements, it is only natural that national interests come first. And that is how international politics works. And this can also lead to peace processes or political agreements being negotiated and even signed far from the continent or outside the mechanism we have carefully established. And while no one should question the goodwill behind some of these initiatives, it is difficult as an African not to feel uneasy when Africa's own institutions and frameworks are sidelined in matters that affect African lives so directly. This, very succinctly, is the complex landscape in which the AU and its member states operate. As we consider how to navigate these challenges, it is worth stressing one clear advantage: more than 20 years of practical experience implementing the African peace and security architecture as laid out in the protocol that established the Peace and Security Council. This gives us something precious: the ability to look back and say with honesty, here is what worked, here is what did not work, and here is where we must adjust course if we are to meet the aspirations of our people. For me, the natural starting point is exactly that protocol, not only because it created the PAC, but also because it captured Africa's collective ambition for how this continent should prevent, manage, and resolve its own conflicts. The PAC protocol did not emerge from a vacuum, nor was it the product of a single moment of inspiration. It was the culmination of decades of African efforts, in fact, almost as old as the OAU itself, to build a continental mechanism capable of addressing violent conflicts on African soil. If you look back, we see a clear lineage. The May 1963 OAU Charter committed member states to settle disputes peacefully. And just little over a year later, in July 1964, African leaders adopted the Cairo Protocol, creating the Mediation, Conciliation, and Arbitration Commission, an early signal that indeed we needed homegrown tools for conflict resolution, even if that institution never took off. In the early 1980s, under the leadership of Sierra Leone, there were attempts to create an African Political Security Council, which also did not succeed, but again signaled a growing ambition. And then, in June 1993, as a result of Dr. Salim's report and the subsequent declaration on fundamental changes in Africa, the Cairo Declaration established the OAU mechanism for conflict prevention, management, and resolution, a major step forward and the first real precursor of what we have today. Seen from this historical angle, the PAC protocol is a milestone that built on the lessons, sometimes painful, including the failure to prevent and stop the genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda, of what had worked before and what had clearly not worked. But at the same time, the protocol represented a real break with the past. It introduced innovations that were quite bold for their time and remain so to date. It created the Peace and Security Council, a standing elected decision-making body, alongside the Panel of the Wise, the Continental Early Warning System, and the African Standby Force. These structures were designed to give Africa the capacity to act at every stage of the conflict cycle, from prevention to mediation to peace support operations to post-conflict reconstruction. The protocol also gave significant responsibilities, not only to the PAC itself, but also, and we often lose sight of this, to the chairperson of the commission. And it was done deliberate. I remember exactly how it was crafted, and in a more limited yet meaningful way to the Panel of the Wise. And to enable the full exercise of these powers, the protocol put in place strong guardrails. It affirms the sovereignty of member states. That is very clear. But it also sets limits. For example, no country can block the inclusion of a conflict on the PAC agenda, and any state directly involved in a conflict is barred from taking place in PAC decisions on that very situation, even if it is an elected member. Substantively, the PAC can recommend intervention in case of genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes, a stark expression of the AU's resolve never again to witness another Rwanda. Another element that deserves emphasis is the architecture of partnerships embedded in the protocol. Within Africa, it recognizes that the RECs, specialized AU organs, and civil society all bring strengths that must be harnessed. If the APSA is a house, these are the pillars. Outside Africa, the protocol is equally clear. The United Nations is the principal partner, especially on peacekeeping, in recognition of the Security Council's primary responsibility for international peace and security. As the multilateral actors are also referenced, the objective is to ensure that international engagement aligns with African priorities, not the other way around. In short, the PAC protocol is a comprehensive blueprint. It leaves no tool of conflict management outside its scope. The PSU protocol should also be understood as the central element of a much broader ecosystem of instruments that African leaders adopted to strengthen the continent's response to peace and security challenges. Consider, for example, the Common African Defense and Security Policy of 2004, or the Non-Aggression and Common Defense Pact of 2005. Both reiterate a core principle. The security of African states is indivisible. A threat to one is a threat to all. They also reinforce a shift already embedded in the PSU protocol, a move towards a human-centric understanding of security and away from the narrow, state-centric approach that had long shaped the thinking of the continental organization. Security in this conception is not only about safeguarding borders, but also about protecting people, their dignity, and their livelihoods. When we turn to counterterrorism, the foundational text is the 1999 OAU Convention on the Prevention and Combating of Terrorism, later reinforced by the 2004 protocol and supported by the Algiers-based African Center. Together, they provide a coherent framework that reflects a deep African concern with the threat of terrorism long before it occupied global headlines. The Pelindaba Treaty, formerly known as the African Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty, was one of the first disarmament instruments adopted by the OAU. Since then, Africa has added other important disarmament policies. For example, the Kempton Park Plan of Action of 1997 on landmines, the Bamako Declaration on Small Arms and Light Weapons of 2000, and various pronouncements on biological and chemical weapons, including by the PSC. On human rights too, Africa has produced an equally rich tapestry of norms, from the Convention on the Specific Aspects of the Refugee Problem in Africa, 1969, to the Charter on Human and People's Rights, 1981, and the Protocol establishing the African Court on Human and People's Rights, 1998, to a whole series of additional instruments addressing the rights of children, women, older persons, and persons with disabilities, as well as the protection of internally displaced persons and the right to nationality and eradication of statelessness. Few regions of the world have attempted such a comprehensive articulation of rights across so many constituencies. If we shift to the governance domain, many instruments come to mind. We have, of course, the 2007 African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance, itself supported by the African Charter on the Principles and Values of Public Service and Administration, and the African Charter on Decentralization and Local Governance. A few years earlier, in 2003, the AU adopted the Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. Going back slightly further, the 2002 OU Summit, the last one, endorsed the Memorandum of Understanding on the Conference on Security, Stability, Development, and Cooperation in Africa, whose solemn declaration had been adopted in Lomé in 2000. This was an initiative launched by President Obasanjo in the early 1990s. The CSS-DCA Memorandum of Understanding is a document rarely mentioned today, yet it was ambitious, organized around 4 calabashes. It was inspired by the CSCA, the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, which spoke of basket. The CSS-DCA spoke of calabashes. The calabash on stability articulated some of the most far-reaching, time-bound commitments ever made by African leaders on governance. One of the most striking was the call to adopt, by 2004, rules limiting the term in office of elected office holders. This enumeration may seem tedious, but I felt it important to recall these instruments to underscore one simple truth. Africa does not suffer from a shortage of norms. What it suffers from is a shortage of implementation. And this leads me to this conclusion. As the continent reflects on how to reinforce its role in the promotion of peace, the priority should be to fulfill existing commitments. Redirecting scarce political and financial resources into new normative processes would disperse our efforts and dilute our focus. Worse, reopening some of these instruments could even prove risky. The political conditions that made their adoption possible no longer exist, and renegotiation may well lead to their weakening. In short, before we adopt anything new, let us implement what we already have. To illustrate my point, let me take the issue of unconstitutional changes of government. With the recent surge in coup d'etats, some have argued that Africa needs even stronger norms. But if you look closely, the problem is not norms, it is implementation. People often say that the definition of unconstitutional changes is too narrow, that the Lomé Declaration of July 2000 did not anticipate the so-called civilian coups, such as lifting term limits through questionable constitutional amendments. But that is not accurate. The African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance explicitly broadened the definition by adding, I quote, any amendment or revision of the Constitution or legal instruments which is an infringement on the principles of democratic change of government, end of quote. Yes, the wording is less precise than what was initially envisaged, but it gives the PAC significant room to act, especially since the Charter uses the phrase inter alia, meaning the list is not exhaustive. The PAC already has the mandate to address these situations if it chooses to do so. And there is even more. The 2014 Malabo Protocol, still not in force more than 10 years later, which further expands these provisions. It reframes the African Charter clause to capture any constitutional amendment, I quote, inconsistent with the Constitution, end of quote, providing additional legal pathways to address the so-called civilian coups. It also introduces an entirely new category of unconstitutional change. I quote, any substantial modification to the electoral law in the last 6 months before elections without the consent of the majority of political actors, end of quote. On top of that, the Malabo Protocol classifies unconstitutional changes of government as an international crime, placing it in the same legal category as genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crime, to be handled by the future African Court of Justice and Human Rights. One can hardly go further than this. The challenge, again, is not the absence of norm. The challenge is making the norms we already have truly matter. Let me now turn to the way forward, how we can reinforce the AU's efforts and give renewed meaning and strength to the mantra of African solutions to African problems. I think Ambassador Bankole recently referred to it. Before doing so, I want to pause on that mantra because it is often misunderstood and at times even mocked, usually against the backdrop of Africa's own difficulties in asserting leadership on conflict prevention and resolution. Some critics argue, how can Africa expect others not to intervene if African institutions themselves are not acting with resolve? But that is precisely the point. African solutions to African problems is not about shutting the door to others. It is about ensuring that Africans define the problem first, based on our own analysis, on our own history, and our own realities. If others define the problem for us, the solutions proposed will inevitably reflect their interest, not ours. Partnerships should amplify African agency, not substitute it. An illustration of this approach is the work of the AU High-Level Panel on Darfur, established by the PAC in 2008 and chaired by former President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa. The panel made one point that still resonates today. Africa stepped forward first in Darfur, convening ceasefire talks, leading peace negotiations, deploying peacekeepers, and insisting on accountability. And as they wrote, when global attention inevitably shifts elsewhere, Africa will still be there because Darfur crisis is also Africa's crisis. What made their work so compelling was the method. Rather than arriving with ready-made answers, the panel went to Darfur, held public hearings, and listened. From that engagement came this insight. The crisis had three interconnected layers. The Sudanese national crisis, the Sudanese crisis as it manifests itself in Darfur, and the Darfur crisis within Darfur itself. That framing was deeply contextual. It was deeply grounded. Professor Mahmoud Mamdani, and I'm sure even those who don't know him now know him, in his separate opinion to the report of the South Sudan Commission of Inquiry, established by the PAC in 2013 under the leadership of former President Obasanjo, captured the spirit perfectly. He wrote that an African solution is above all a contextual solution, one that recognizes that every situation is shaped by multiple factors, historical, political, moral, and economic. He argues African solution is a call to move away from single formula templates and instead understand how these factors interact in each specific case. Let me add two brief clarifications before turning to the practical recommendations. First, on resources. We often hear that Africa cannot fully assert its role without major financial means. Of course, some resources are indispensable. You cannot deploy mediators, bring parties together, or engage regional actors without a minimum operational budget. And I must say, the recent progress on the Revitalized Peace Fund is impressive. It took time, yes, but when I recall the days when we struggled to raise a mere $8 million a year, the contrast is striking. But this remains insufficient. And Commissioner Bankole made a compelling point in this respect, and I can only sympathize with the predicament of the department. But this makes the need for more creativity, agility, and the constant search for opportunities even more urgent. This is a responsibility of not only of member states and the Commission, but of all of us as concerned African citizens. The Commission in particular is often overwhelmed with crises and daily pressures. It does not always have the space to take a step back. That is why sharing ideas and proposing solutions is so important. The second point is on political will. When progress stalls, the easy explanation is member states lack political will. Sometimes that is true, or often it is true, I should say. There are cases where our governments do not extend the cooperation the PSC protocol requires, or where PSC members fall short, even far short, of the mandate they accepted. But political will is not something that simply appears. It has to be generated, encouraged, and nurtured. Here, the Commission has a key role to engage proactively, to build coalitions around sensitive issues, and to create the conditions in which states feel both empowered and compelled to act. I would like now to suggest 5 practical steps to bring African solutions to African problems back to the center of our peace efforts. First, we need to return to the spirit of the Peace and Security Council 2004 Statement of Commitment, the founding pledge made when the Council was launched here in Addis Ababa. African leaders promised that Africa must speak first, move first, and act early. They were unequivocal. No conflict should be out of bounds for the AU. And when grave abuses occur, the PSC should be the first to condemn and the first to respond. And this is essential for one simple reason. If Africa does not step forward early, a vacuum opens, and others will inevitably fill it. Often with the best of intentions, sometimes pursuing their national interests, but always stepping into a space that should, in the first instance, belong to African institutions. And we cannot blame the communities who welcome those outside efforts. When people are suffering, they will understandably embrace any actor who promises relief. So, the point is not to reject partners. It is to ensure that Africa's voice is the first one heard, and Africa's analysis the first one considered. That was the promise made in May 2004. And I should confess that although even then we did not always meet that standard, it remained the right ambition today. We should be deliberate, strategic, and consistent in narrowing the gap between our commitments and our actions. Second, for the AU and its RECs to reclaim a central role in peace and security, they must reinvest in the areas where Africa has always had the greatest comparative advantage: prevention, mediation, and peacemaking. These tools are not only far more affordable than large peacekeeping operations, they are the ones that have consistently delivered results when used well. And importantly, this is exactly what the PAC protocol intended. In public debates, people often jump straight to the provisions on peace support operations or the possibility of military intervention. But if you look carefully at the protocol, it is actually built on a very balanced foundation. One of its strongest features is the emphasis it places on operational and structural conflict prevention and on peacemaking. This comes through clearly in its objectives, in its guiding principles, and in the powers it assigns, not only to the PAC, but also to the chairperson of the Commission and panel of the WISE. Even the African Standby Force, so often viewed purely through a military lens, is explicitly expected to support preventative work. This was intentional. The drafters of the protocol wanted the AU to step in early before crises become unmanageable, rather than arriving late with heavier tools. Let me illustrate what I mean by reinvesting in peacemaking by recalling some of the most innovative practices the PAC and the Commission have developed over the years. I will start with what I have called, short of a better name, framework communiques. These are not ordinary communiques. They are comprehensive roadmaps in which the PAC lays out in details what needs to happen, by when, and according to which principle. They give clarity, they set boundaries, and they limit the parties' room for maneuver. A good example is the PAC communique of 24 April 2012 on Sudan and South Sudan after the Hague League, called Pantu in South Sudan, incident. The PAC spelled out a full sequence of steps on security, on oil, on borders, and defined acceptable behavior for both parties, explicitly grounding it in AU norms like the non-use of force and respect for territorial integrity. When the UN Security Council endorsed that roadmap under Chapter 7, in actual fact, it copied the PAC communique. It created a diplomatic gravity field. It pulled all actors towards compliance, but on the basis of an African-defined process. And this practice is not new. During the Ivorian crisis that began in 2002, the PAC, working closely with ECOWAS, did the same. Based on the Linas-Marcoussis Agreement, Accra III Agreement, and later Pretoria Agreement, the AU set out the duration of the transition, the extension of President Gbagbo's mandate, because elections could not be held, the appointment and powers of the Prime Minister, and the core priorities of the transition. Again, Africa defined the parameters while partners helped reinforce them. Another way the PAC tried to lead from the front is by creating ad hoc high-level mechanisms, usually made up of sitting or former head of state. Think of the Cote d'Ivoire High-Level Panel and the Libya High-Level Committee in 2011, or the AU High-Level Implementation Panel on Sudan and South Sudan. These were not cosmetic initiatives. They brought in people whose presence alone commanded attention internationally. Why does this matter for African solutions? Because when the AU sends in heavyweight mediators, early and visibly, it shapes the agenda before others do. It prevents the usual vacuum in which external actors step in, sometimes with the active support of local populations who are desperate for any help. These mechanisms also gave the Commission some room to maneuver. By working behind high-profile envoys, the AU Commission could influence difficult political files without exposing itself or the institution to direct backlash from member states. It is a technique that echoes the old OU days, but with a more assertive AU style, not just listing, but actually pushing for solutions. Sudan is the best example. Through the AU high-level panel, the AU exercised sustained leadership on the file, guided by a simple but powerful conviction: Darfur's crisis is Africa's crisis, and Africa has a duty to respond. In Côte d'Ivoire, the high-level panel helped reconcile deep divisions among AU member states during the 2010-2011 post-election crisis. Its recommendations were endorsed by the PAC, and later, and that is unique, informed the Constitutional Council dramatic reversal recognizing President Ouattara's victory, explicitly citing the legal weight of AU decisions. Libya, of course, was more difficult. The AU could not change the trajectory of the NATO-led intervention, but thanks to the ad hoc committee, the AU position, political dialogue, and an inclusive transition was at least clearly articulated and not lost in the noise. Across all these cases, the ad hoc structures operated closely with the Commission and helped ensure that Africa had a voice, ideally the voice, before others define the terms of engagement. Finally, the AU has also resorted to the creation of initial contact groups, sometimes AU-led, sometimes co-led with REX. The idea is simple: get all the key actors around one table early, so Africa can set the tone and avoid fragmented and competing initiatives. These groups usually bring together the AU Commission, neighboring states, the relevant track, major international organizations, the permanent members of the UN Security Council, the African members of the Council, and the bilateral partners who matter most for that specific crisis. They have been used in Guinea in 2008, Madagascar in 2009, and the Central African Republic in 2013. These groups allow the AU, in spite of its limited resources, to shape the narrative and coordinate international response instead of being sidelined by better resourced actors. And they help preempt the usual problem: external partners launching their own initiative without regard to African-led processes. By creating an institutionalized multilateral space where everyone is present, the AU raises the political cost of bypassing Africa. It is what one could call a form of diplomatic encirclement, a polite but firm way of saying, if you want to act, you act with us, not around us. Let me say a few words about the management of unconstitutional changes, because this is central to peacemaking, and the EU is currently dealing with several such situations. And while the EU needs to display some tactical flexibility, it is important that it stays within the limits of existing instruments. In practice, this means two things. First, suspending a country after an unconstitutional change should remain automatic, unless the change results from a genuine popular uprising followed by a civilian-led inclusive transition. Second, when the PAC decides to depart from established norms, for example, allowing coup leaders to run in elections meant to restore constitutional order, it should say so openly. It should present the decision as an exception, reaffirm the validity of the rules, and explain why the deviation is justified. The PAC may indeed have good strategic and contextual reasons, but the lack of clear explanations weaken the norm and reduce leverage the next time a similar crisis emerges. Third point, on prevention. The EU should double down. Let me start with operational prevention. This is never easy. States will naturally invoke sovereignty to fend off what they may perceive as an interference in their domestic affairs. But the EU is well placed to pursue it, thanks to its rich normative and policy frameworks. The key is to leverage these strategically to find entry point and gain member states' cooperation. One tool worth stronger use is the panel of the wise, mandated to act not only at the request of the chairperson or the PAC, but also on its own initiative. The panel should speak out boldly on issues the Commission or the PAC find difficult to address publicly. By articulating a clear African voice, it prevents the creation of vacuums that others fill. In fact, when we joked about its creation in the early 2000s, we often refer to it as the panel of the crazy because its members were expected to say what no one else dared. Governance challenges lie at the heart of many African crises, and constant changes of government are the most obvious example. But the Sahel itself reminds us that insecurity also is first and foremost the result of a governance crisis. Fortunately, Africa has long-standing frameworks on elections, democracy, human rights, local governance, and anti-corruption. The challenge is follow-up and implementation. And here, the mantra of African solutions is vital. Governance is such a sensitive issue that intervention by external partners often elicit strong opposition. Practical steps are possible. One, within the framework of the continental structural conflict prevention, of the continental structural conflict prevention framework, the AU could immediately enhance the PSC capacity to monitor democratic practices, rule of law, and good governance. It's one of the powers of the PSC, drawing on the February 2010 summit decision to appoint an independent rapporteur whose reports would inform PSC review. Second, in partnership with the UN, the AU could further combine its legitimacy and normative frameworks with UN expertise and capacity, focusing on supporting national governments to implement their commitment, empowering grassroots and civil society actors to hold leaders accountable, and disseminating existing instruments, strengthening relevant continental and regional structures so they can more effectively execute their mandate. Let me end with a few points on peace support operations, or peacekeeping in the UN language. My view is simple. The AU should leave large-scale peacekeeping to the UN and instead play a stronger strategic and political role in shaping those UN missions. 3 reasons for this. First, peacekeeping is extremely resource and time-intensive. When the PSC protocol was drafted in 2002, the assumption was that African states would fund AU missions and the UN would support them when necessary. Neither, unfortunately, materialized, and there are no signs that this will change anytime soon. Second, the root causes of most African crises, including those linked to terrorism, are political and governance related and not military. Peace enforcement can contain a threat, but it cannot substitute for political commitment by national actors. Third, the AU's comparative advantage is political, shaping strategy, ensuring coherence, and helping keep peace efforts on a multilateral track. Strong UN operations ultimately benefit Africa most, and when they fail, we are the first to feel the consequences. So what does this mean in practice? The AU should help address the practical challenges facing UN missions, freedom of movement, mandate implementation, human rights concerns, and use its own normative frameworks to reinforce UN effort. Much of this work should happen at the Security Council, where the A3 can sometimes shield African issues from wider geopolitical tensions. The AU could also embed liaison teams in UN missions, join UN strategic reviews, and even conduct its own assessment ahead of mandate renewal, so Africa shapes the conversation, not just react to it. Of course, there will be cases where the UN cannot or will not intervene. The EU will then have to step in, but that should remain the exception. For counterterrorism in particular, the AU's focus should be on flexible, voluntary security cooperation among states in formats that make political sense, bilateral, trilateral, or wider coalition. This could include joint procurement of equipment, learning from the COVID-19 experience, where African states use a common platform to acquire vaccines and medical supplies. Pooling critical assets, strategic airlift, medevac, casevac, as some European states already do. Joint or coordinated border patrols, whether between 2, 3, or more states. Some efforts exist already, but they need to become more systematic and effective. The AU and the REX should guide this work politically, build the technical foundation, and help member states explore these cooperation models, develop concept of operations, and strengthen capacity building on the work that has already been done within the framework of the Nouakchott process. To conclude, I cannot but stress, as Commissioner Bankole did, that we are living through a turbulent moment. Power is dispersing. International law is eroding. Multilateralism is weakening. And development assistance is shrinking. This shift carries real risk for Africa. When global rules are ignored, our continent often pays the highest price. When multilateralism frays, our space to defend African interests narrows. And when international solidarity fades, budgets and livelihood feel the strain. But this moment is also not only about danger, it is also about possibility. As the global order is being reshaped, Africa has a rare chance to help define a more inclusive system. To seize opportunities and mitigate the shocks, we must first put our own house in order, build what Salim Ahmed Salim called Africa's inner strength in his landmark 1990 report on the fundamental changes taking place in the world. And one of the most urgent tasks is to tackle the peace and security challenges in front of us. The good news is that Africa is not starting from scratch. We have the frameworks, the institutions, and decades of experience. What we need now is focus, consistency, and strategic clarity and resolve. I thank you for your kind attention. Yes.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Wan. I will not even attempt a summary of this erudite presentation. Commissioner, I know that you have another engagement, but may I please request for a few more minutes of your time? Thank you. So I will now invite the moderator for the session, Dr. Basu Gowden, founder and executive director of one of the partners of the TFP program, Accord, and one of Africa's leading conflict management practitioners. A Fulbright scholar with an LLM from Georgetown University, he has supported political negotiations and mediation processes in Burundi, the DRC, Madagascar, and the Central African Republic, among others. He has advised a number of high-level facilitators, including former presidents, on peace processes. Dr. Gowden founded the Global Peace in 2018 to strengthen multilateral cooperation and global solidarity. And with that, I would leave you to have this conversation, but please do not forget us in the audience. We may have some questions as well, all within the 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Firstly, let me say thank you, Commissioner, for arranging this. Ambassador, thank you from Africa to your government. We thank you. 30 years is no small period. It's a significant period and a significant commitment. I have to say that I left a very important, to me at least, meeting in South Africa to come here in deference to the fact that your government put these resources to help Africa. What was the important meeting that I left in South Africa? It was a meeting with Shashi Tharoor. Some of you may know Shashi Tharoor. He is currently the leader of the Indian Congress, I think, in the parliament. He's in South Africa to address to deliver the Archbishop Desmond Tutu annual lecture, which I had the privilege of delivering in 2017. Now, why do I raise Shashi Tharoor in this speech? Because it was Shashi Tharoor whom your government sent in 1995. He was then the deputy to Kofi Annan, who was the head of Department of Peacekeeping Operation, not UN Secretary General at the time. And your government commissioned Shashi Tharoor to come and meet with institutions around the area of peacekeeping that your government was thinking about funding following the meeting between our two presidents, Mandela and your president. And it was my first time to meet Shashi Tharoor, 1995. He came to Durban to Accord, and sat down and said, this is what the Norwegian government wants to do. Fortunately, we had a fledgling peacekeeping project in Accord, and then he went to ISS in Pretoria and met with my counterpart, Yaki Saliers, because they felt that Accord was more closely aligned to the liberation movements, which is our history and where we came from, and Yaki Saliers was more aligned to the then apartheid military that was still now coming into the new dispensation in South Africa, and they wanted to get both sides, the liberation side and the apartheid military side, and that's how Accord and ISS were partnered together with the Norwegian Institute for International Affairs. That's the history of it. The civilian dimensions, I first met one in the OAU in '93. One was an intern there. We were both very young at the time. The first Peace and Security Commissioner, Said Janet, was the Chief of Staff of Dr. Salim Salim's office. And PSOD was a military-oriented entity. What the TFP project did was to introduce the civilian dimensions of peacekeeping, because the nature of peacekeeping had actually changed from interstate peacekeeping to intrastate peacekeeping. And that's the important role that the TFP program contributed to Africa, to peace, peacekeeping, peacemaking, prevention in Africa. Through the program, we seconded, as you remember, Yvonne Kasumba from Uganda. She was in our peacekeeping project. We seconded her for 6 months. She ended up spending 2 years. After she left, Walter Lotz from Accord then came into PSOD to continue that work. And finally, when he left, Zinuddin Al-Ghali from Accord came into the PSOD, and we're very proud to know that Zinu left as acting head of PSOD before he went as deputy to the permanent representative of the AU in New York. So this is the long history of what happened in the TFP program, and our partners ISS, which played a major role on the policing side with the CivPols, etc. So I just wanted to give that quick background, but we're very grateful to your government for the sustained effort, which I think is what we would like to see with the partners. Now, Commissioner, you gave me a tall order here, but very relevant questions. Can we be strong in the midst of internal strife and political violence? We are supposed to be united in the global order, but today we are more divided, more intrastate division. Resilience, how can we be resilient when we are not responding to the shocks? And fourthly, you said, how can we be united when we are chronically dependent on our partners? I hope I captured all four. Influential. Yesterday, I had the privilege of meeting for the first time the deputy chairperson in her office, and I spent an hour and a half with her on precisely these issues, and precisely the issue around Pan-Africanism and our unity. And I said that Pan-Africanism is dead. It actually is dead. And the question is, how do we revive Pan-Africanism? How do we revive Pan-African unity in the face of a rapidly changing world? Now, I hear you, Juan, and I hear the things, and I want to put a question to you, Juan, related to all of this, is that we are not witnessing just major geopolitical shifts. And let me, Ambassador Parfait, you're an eternal optimist of hope, you said. You know, I am an eternal optimist of hope also. And when we are looking at our situation today in Africa with all the wars on the continent, the refugees and, you know, million refugees in Sudan, we shouldn't take a historical view to society. Because our hope should come from the fact that even our colleagues who support us today, the United States, I see the ambassador here, in your war, civil war between 1861 and 1865, you lost 800,000 people in that short period. For our European friends, in the First and Second World War, you lost almost 80 million people. So we should take hope. Today, they're stable. The US, yes, we see. So it doesn't mean that if we are going through all this, but it doesn't mean we need to repeat where they went through. We need to look at the lessons of where they've come from and what can we do. So that the first point, we can't take an ahistorical view to society. The second point is that when we look at these changes, there are huge geopolitical shifts that are taking place. But more importantly, there is a paradigm shift that is taking place. For the issues that we are discussing today, what is the paradigm shift? And I want to put that question to you, Juan, and then ask you, in the face of that paradigm shift, how do we build resilience? How do we become influential, Commissioner? How do we strengthen the AU, which is, in my opinion, today at its weakest, including the United Nations, at its weakest because of these political shifts that are taking place? So what is the paradigm shift? We presided, all of us, presided over the last 3 decades over what I call the glory days of mediation and peacemaking and peacekeeping. Everything you see in the African Union today related to peacemaking, peacekeeping, prevention, etc., is post-1990. Everything you see in the United Nations today is post-1990. It's that golden age that I talk about. What was the golden age? We operated in a paradigm of peace through dialogue. In a paradigm of peace through dialogue, it is underpinned, or was underpinned, by values. We were striving for certain values, democracy, human rights, all of the things you talked about. But in addition, it was to be transformative. We were seeking to transform our societies and to have the peace dividends at the end of it, whatever period that was supposed to be, the alleviation of poverty, unemployment, inequality. That's what we were seeking to do. The currency of peace through dialogue was gravitas, institutional legitimacy, and moral authority. Why my country, South Africa, became such a major player in peacemaking in the initial years? Because we possessed the currency of peace through dialogue. The gravitas of a Nelson Mandela, the moral authority of having resolved our own conflict through negotiations, and at the time the AU and the UN had the institutional legitimacy. This is why peace through dialogue was so successful in the last 2 decades. In the last 5 years, there's been a shift, a paradigm shift. Not just the geopolitical changes taking place, but a paradigm shift from peace through dialogue to peace through strength. President Trump, in his inaugural speech, when he took office, he said in that speech, "I will be a peacemaker, but peace through strength." This is in his speech. What does peace through strength mean? Peace through strength is underpinned not by values, it's underpinned by interests. It is not transformative, it is transactional. The currency of peace through strength is not gravitas, moral authority, or institutional legitimacy. The currency is military might, economic might, and what's coming is artificial intelligence proficiency. So this is a complete paradigm shift. Why are we, as the African Union, the REX, being marginalized? Because no single African country, not even my own South Africa, possesses the currency for peace through strength. We don't have military might, we don't have economic might, and we don't have artificial intelligence proficiency. As a result of which, what leverage, what influence do we have in the current evolving geopolitical order? The major powers, the United States, Russia, China, they have military might, economic might. The middle powers, Turkey, the Gulf countries, they have economic influence, etc. Which is why agreements are not being reached in Addis Ababa, they're being reached in Doha and in Washington. This is a reality. Now, is peace through strength wrong? I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is it can get you temporary solutions like a ceasefire. like a humanitarian corridor? Can it sustain and deal with the deep underlying causes? No, it can't. So we need to think, and when we think about the African Union, we think about our influence, we need to think and talk to our partners across the world who profess peace through strength, that peace through strength and peace through dialogue are two sides of the same coin. We need peace through strength, but we need peace through dialogue also. So one, now in the context of all these geopolitical changes and this paradigm shift, how do we navigate as Africa to ensure that we continue to have the leverage and the influence?
Yeah, no, thank you, Vasu. I'm not sure you really put a question to me. You were rather another panelist, and I'm not surprised that's your habit. But anyway, no, on a more serious note, it's clear that we are going through a very challenging period. There is no doubt about it. I think Commissioner Bankole made the point, Parfait as well. I also emphasized that point, and I did it also with Guinea and Mayaki in a paper we co-authored last July, I believe, or last June, I can't remember. And in that global shift, obviously, where power, hard power, plays a bigger role, Africa is at a disadvantage. There is no doubt about it. And again, as I said, when multilateralism falters, our ability as Africans to play a role diminishes, because it was through multilateral systems that we're able to build coalitions to defend our interests. Not that the system that was inherited after the Second World War was fair, absolutely not. It has to change, but at least it gave us a seat at the table. Though there is no doubt about it. However, I still believe we have a lot of agency. We have a lot of agency as Africans. It's up to us to use it smartly and to use it in the current context and to know how to maneuver and how to navigate in the current context. And I think we have one asset, we have a huge one, and I try just to give a snapshot of it in the area of peace and security, is that we have top-class norms and instruments that were built in the 90s. If I go to the economic domain, I could list, of course, the African Continental Free Trade Area before the Abuja Treaty, because the Free Trade Area is just one of the stages envisaged by the Abuja Treaty. In fact, the overall framework is the Abuja Treaty. We have the single African air transport market. We have the protocol on free movement. And I could list and go on and list a host of policies, that were developed not only during the AU time, but also during the OU time. I had the privilege, as you said, as an intern to do research for a PhD I never completed. And I think I know the AU archives in and out. And you would be impressed by the level and quality of discussions in the early 60s, 70s. Because up to 1966, you have verbatim records of everything that was discussed. That has stopped again, unfortunately. But you have verbatim records up to 1966. So we have those assets. Now, we have to leverage them. Ideally, it requires a dialectic process between the Commission and member states. When member states are united, or at least we have a group of like-minded countries leading the process, as was the case in the early 2000s, then it's easier for the Commission to prosper. And when our big member states, or the most powerful by African standards, South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and many others, have their own challenges or are divided, obviously, the ability of the Commission to steer the integration process, to promote peace, security, good governance is diminished. But it does not mean it disappears. It just means that we have to be, in fact, even more creative, more agile, more nimble in identifying opportunities. And I still believe we don't have time to have a discussion, but I could personally, at least from my point of view, looking at the issues confronting for each of them, I could identify what we could do as Africans. I'm not sure it would fundamentally alter the situation, but I'm certain it will have an impact. So I think the response for me is not to say we're going to abandon our values, to succumb to other ways of doing things, because they will not work for us. Force will not work for us. What will work for us is dialogue, is consensus building, is norms and values. We should stick to our norms. I know, the sea is quite turbulent currently. We should stick to our norms and be, in fact, even more creative, more agile, and more nimble. And that is a task for the Commission, but it's also a task for all of us as Africans. If you have ideas, we should share them with the Commission. We should push, we should also hold the Commission and our member states accountable. But again, we should not change course. Rather, we should, precisely because of the danger that is looming, we should stick even in a more firmer manner to our values, our principles, and our ways of doing things. Thank you.
So let me open this up before I come to the panel to ask if the panel has any contribution on that. So what Juan is saying is that, yes, in the face of these huge geopolitical shifts, paradigm shifts that are taking place, we need to hold steady, look at the assets that we have, that we've built up over the years, and then to see how best we can use that to leverage and to influence our own destiny on the continent. Let me give the floor. I see Solomon, I see Paul Handy, so I don't know if we have a roving mic or something, or is this the mic we're going to use? There's a mic there. Okay. Of being gender biased, so let me give everybody a chance. Solomon, carry on.
Thank you very much, Vasu, for giving me the opportunity. I would like to, first of all, thank the organizers of the event, the African Union, through Ambassador Bankole, the Training for Peace, and the Norwegian Embassy. Very grateful for providing and creating this important space for reflecting on these profoundly important questions that Ambassador Bankole posed in the context of the fundamental changes that are happening in the world, and also the point about the imperative for African unity, that it being existential, as SRG Parfait put it. I think for me, history matters a great deal, incredibly. If we go back to the time of the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, one of the most prophetic, visionary, compelling arguments that were put forward for African unity was by Kwame Nkrumah. He saw what was coming for this continent. He compellingly, with statistics and data, in his groundbreaking work on Africa Must Unite. If you look at the statistics and analysis that he did in that work, we have all to forget about what we think we are doing new. There is nothing new that we are doing. That is why I fully agree with the point that Juan made, that the issue is not really about making a compelling case or making it palatable to our leaders. I think we have to interrogate our leaders rather than making anything palatable to them. Because if they are leaders, they mislead. The problem is that they are not leading. They are actually bringing us all down. I think that is the crisis that we are facing. The crisis of ideological and moral bankruptcy. The crisis of leaders not capable of leading. That, I think, is something that we need really to put on the table. Now, if I become very practical, given everything that has been said, including the paradigm shift, because the point about the paradigm shift is so profound, because the African Peace and Security Architecture and the PSC protocol that one eloquently shared with us is premised on certain assumptions. And one of that assumption is exactly the point that you made, Vasu, which is peace through dialogue. That is the assumption on which it is premised. It is also premised on the assumption of an international system that is willing to support and collaborate with Africa. these two assumptions are gone. And what do these mean for Africa and the African Union and the ABSA? If we make this practical in the situation in Sudan, what does it mean? So I put it to you. One, after all that you have said, let's apply these things to the current situation in Sudan. What is it that the African Union, member states, need to do now, today, in order to contain and hold this downward spiral that indeed you rightly characterize as something that should shock the conscience of the international community? Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Let me give the floor to Paul Andy. And then, Commissioner, I want you maybe just to reflect whilst we're talking on the point you raised about unity. You know, in a paradigm driven by values, it's not easy, to get unity because we share values. And that's what we tried to do in the last 30 years. But in a paradigm driven by interests, it becomes competitive. How in that competitiveness will you now get unity? Paul Andy, you have the floor.
Thank you. And thanks to all the speakers, really, for great insights. Two questions. The first one to Juan. We really, and these are also questions I'm grappling with, yeah, so I'm a bit unfair sending them to you, but, okay. The first question is your point about the frameworks being great, the problem is implementation. We hear that a lot. What we hear a bit lesser is how. Everybody says political will is missing. Yes, but how do we get there? I'm also grappling with that. The second question, and Vasu alluded a bit to it, talking about South Africa. ABSA was predicated on the fact that our so-called hegemons, I can name them, will carry more weight in pacifying their regions first and going broader into the continent. What is your view about our hegemons today? Vasu said South Africa hasn't invested in literally everything that needs to be done to be a hegemon. But I can name other countries. While our hegemons can't, what do you think about ABSA if those who should lead can't? Or are so inward looking that actually their priorities are more national than regional? Thank you.
Mike, to Commissioner Bankole, because I know you have to leave, and we appreciate that you gave us the time. So,
no, thank you. Thank you, Vasu. Thank you to our panelists, particularly Mr. Wan for his very erudite presentation. And to you, Ambassador, for staying with us for 30 years. We really appreciate Training for Peace. And once again, I'd wanted a more interactive conversation, but I think it's been one way. And just before I leave, I will just try to make one of 2 points. The first is that Africa is imploding in many ways. Many of us did not address the issues of the youth. And I wanted to see, I see some young researchers at the back. I wanted to hear their voices, but they are not speaking. But they're speaking on the streets of our capitals. They're speaking on the streets of various villages and communities. And they are unhappy. What has become of the African Union is that technical leadership has taken over political leadership. And I believe this is what Dr. Paul Simon was trying to allude to. Our decisions of the Assembly are virtually written by us, not by our leaders. Recently, I had a dinner event with a former prime minister. A former prime minister. And I recalled in my days in NEPAD how I worked with late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi. He virtually wrote the decisions for NEPAD. It means he owned them. But now, who is writing the decisions? We. And on the last day of the summit, we hardly have any leader in the room apart from the chair. So political will has become technical will. And I've said so when I was campaigning for this job. I said conflict prevention, mediation must be centered, early warning must be centered around political action, not technical. So to solve the challenges in the Sahel today must be owned by our leaders. Because we can go on 1,000 missions, but they will not listen to us. They will listen more to their peers. And that's why I agree with Vaso that it's not just peace through strength. It must be complemented by peace through dialogue. And I will add reconciliation. Because if you are at war, even in the family, if you don't reconcile, you are going to take the baggage of that with you forever. The leading lights. I was a very young officer in Cairo when former President Olusegun Obasanjo came to Cairo and proposed CAP, Cairo, Abuja, Pretoria. That there was a need in the 1990s for this to become the drivers of regional integration and stability. It did not take off as he wanted, but today it's also a precursor to NEPAD, to the APRM. But today, what do we see? These institutions have all become very, very technical. And we just churn out reports and policy papers that people do not read. But it should not be all gloomy. That's the beauty of it. We must not forget that last month, or in September, Malawi had a peaceful election. Peaceful transfer, political power, without virtually no bloodshed. But we don't reference that. We must not forget, same thing happened in Seychelles. Yes, it could be 100,000 population, but it's African. So we should not only be looking, we should be inspired by this. And let me end by saying I agree fully with Mr. Wan, and I'm going to request for his paper so that we can really use it. Yes, because he has shed more light on our past and how we can look at the future. It's exactly what I've always stated. African solutions to African problems does not mean the exclusion of partners, but it means being in the driver's seat, whether it's Sudan or Eastern DRC. And we agree that the world is changing, and no one, yesterday I met with a group of human rights activists pleading with us for human rights action in Sudan. And I said, yes, but I don't have the resources to deploy anybody to Sudan. I'll be told it's not in my budget. How will it be in my budget? How will Madagascar be in the budget for 2025? Nobody knew that that would happen. So I want to just really thank the organizers for making this a good conversation. I think we should, the ambassador mentioned a lot about knowledge. I think we should ensure that we take this knowledge forward by documenting it, generating it properly, and circulating it. And looking for how we can galvanize our leaders again to the days of yore, the glory days that you mentioned. It's doable. We cannot do this alone. We need political leadership, not technical. We have all the best experts in-house, in PAPS. That's not a problem. Norway supports us with over 30 staff. We do the reports. We do the papers. But we really need action on the field. And I believe next time you are celebrating your 60 years of the training for peace, we should go to a place where we can see peace, security, and development nexus at work. I thank you so much. I'll be leaving shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and you are excused, Commissioner. We know you have very serious matters to deal with.
Please don't leave. We know that we've gone way past time, but we have arranged for your lunch. So please do not leave.
Okay, let me give the floor to, as the Commissioner, let's give the Commissioner a chance to leave. Juan, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Fasu. And thanks also to Commissioner Bankole for his words of conclusion. I was waiting for, what's his name, for Solomon. I wanted to ask, to provoke him a bit.
He called Solomon, tell him to come back.
No, I know. No,
Tell Solomon he must come back in.
No, it's his.
Solomon, he's wanting to provoke you.
I want to provoke Solomon a bit. Well, not to provoke, but just to build on what he said about President Nkrumah. And clearly, he was ahead of his time. Often we say, even in politics, in French, to be right early is a mistake, somehow. But he was ahead of his time, and truly ahead of his time. There is a new book that came about him, written by Howard French, Africa, the Political Emancipation. I would really strongly advise each of you to look at it. It's the second volume of a larger book about the contribution of Africa to the making of the modern world, and often it's understated. I just wanted to, building on what Solomon said, just recall one instance, which happened in October 1965 in Accra. It was the second OU summit. The first one took place in Cairo, because Addis was the founding summit, and the second one took place in Accra. Usually summits take place in June, July, during the time, and the summit in July was in Accra, was delayed. October 65 was delayed because there was a risk of boycott by some Francophone country. As you know, there were divisions predating the creation of the EU between so-called moderate and revolutionaries, and that was somehow mended here in Addis thanks to Emperor Haile Selassie. But they resurfaced quickly. There was an assassination attempt against President Jori Amani of Niger in Niamey, and then they accused Ghana of being the mastermind, trying to subvert political order in a moderate African country. And many African countries threatened to boycott, Francophone, threatened to boycott the summit, so it took time to organize the summit, and the summit was held finally in October in Accra. And as you know, when the OU was founded here in Addis, one could, it's a very simplistic but relatively accurate, could divide African leaders between those who advocated for immediate political unity, Nkrumah mainly, I would say, and those who advocated for a gradual approach. Siranana of Madagascar, Senghor, Senegal, Bourguiba, even many other leaders, later on, Nyerere was not here, but even him was for a gradual approach. But anyway, but Nkrumah never gave up. And that's why the AU archives are so fascinating during that period, because you have the verbatim records of the discussions. They had lengthy discussions in Cairo, and President Nkrumah repeated, of course, his position. Then they had also lengthy conversations in Accra, on that subject, but also on the subject of non-subversion. In fact, the first OU resolution on non-subversion was written in Accra after lengthy debate, precisely because of what happened in Nigeria. So during that debate in Accra, President Nkrumah had a memorable exchange with the then Prime Minister of Sierra Leone, Sir Albert Margai. So, Sir Albert Margai, of course, was for a gradual approach. Then he asked Nkrumah, why do you oppose African countries coming together at regional level? After all, that was still progress. Then Nkrumah replied by asking, why do you oppose the immediate unity of the entire continent if that was to be decided? And then Sir Albert Margai answered, my friend, you have become an Irish, you answer every question with another question. So, and, sorry. And my point here is to say, we Africans should all become a little bit Irish and respond to every question with a better one. How do we finally make that unity real? So, but anyway, back to the issue, but I completely agree with you. And there is no alternative to African unity. It's no longer an emotional issue. It's an issue of survival. I think it's an important point. I think we need to, and it applies to peace and security. It applies to Africa's role in the global system. It also applies to economic issues. None of our countries would survive absent a continental unity. And by the way, one of the few, I would say, African actors, and I would always say our airline, Ethiopian, I would say it's an African airline. I would say our airline as Africans, that really realized that Pan-Africanist matter is Ethiopian Airlines. The motto of Ethiopian Airlines, when it started, was bringing Africa together. It was later that they came with the motto linking Africa to the rest of the world, which indeed they are doing and is making us all proud. And it shows that African unity works. If you go to the Addis Ababa airport, and what makes me proud is that when you look at the list of flights, literally you see every single African city. They still don't have Nouakchott, but it will come. But the point I'm making is that African unity works economically. It makes a lot of sense. Obviously, it makes money also by linking us to China, linking us to the US, linking us to Europe. But first and foremost, they made money and became sustainable by linking Africans together. So it makes it's a rational economic choice. And I hope our leaders understand that it's also a rational political choice. I think that was the point I wanted to make. Now, on some of the issues you raised, first about, let me just go back. How do we create leverage? How does the EU create leverage? I can only refer to my experience. I left the EU in 2019, but I left my position as director in 2015. I refer to what I have seen. And obviously, as our Commissioner Bankole said, we need always to go back to the past, and history matters a lot, a great deal, because we can learn what works and what did not work. And I think one way for us, or for the EU, our organization, to regain a central role is also to be bold, not to be afraid to be bold. I'll give you an example, and I hope I'm not disclosing secrets because no longer valid. I can't remember the year, but it was under President Lansana Conte, no, of Guinea. There were demonstrations, and a number of people were killed, mostly women. I was then, I think they called me senior political officer. It was a P3 position, I can't remember. And AU was quite flat in terms of structure. President Konare called me, and he told me, could you draft a letter from me to the President of Guinea to say, after what happened, he should resign and open the way for a transition? Well, I was quite a revolutionary at that time, so I quickly drafted the letter, brought it to him. He said, it's okay, he signed, Then we forwarded it through a not verbal. Few days later, he called me back, telling me, do you remember that letter? Yes. Have you sent it? Yes, I did send it. I sent it to the embassy, but he said, our ambassadors are cowards. The ambassador won't dare send that letter to Conakry. You can be sure it will die at the embassy. Do you know someone at Jeune Afrique, the weekly, now monthly, French written magazine printed from Paris? I said, yes, I had a good friend who was a Senegalese journalist. Can you leak the letter to him so African people would know where we stand? Which obviously I did. So the point I'm making is, and I can give another example. With the crisis in Darfur, and I could list many other AU chairpersons. I'm just taking the example of Konaré because I spoke to him yesterday, so it comes to mind. He went to Darfur. And when he went to Darfur, of course, the governor wanted him to sleep in his residence. He decided to sleep with the IDPs. That night, he spent it with the IDPs in the camp. And when he came back, he wanted to see President Bashir. And I remember we had rented a plane, a Fokker 50 or ATR 42 with ET, which had a cut-off time, for takeoff because of some security reasons. And in fact, Konaré could not come back that night because the pilot said they are not going to fly after the cut-off time. And rightly so. And that's why ET works. It's technically competent. So he wanted to see President Bashir. And when he saw him, just part of what he told him, I have been to Darfur. If you pursue on this path, you will end up in ICC. So the point I'm making is we have to be bold vis-a-vis our member states, but we have also to be bold vis-a-vis our partners. Partners, of course, work together based on mutual interest. But when we see actions that contravene AU policies, we should also have the courage to openly tell partners that we disagree with what they have done. I could give many other examples. Probably in the Sahel, I think we could have been bolder on some of the issues because we have tools on mercenaries, for instance, which we could have really, leveraged to say certain truths. We could say so on Sudan and so on. Again, it does not mean fighting with partners, but partnership means frank exchanges. Again, from my own experience on the Libya file, a resolution was adopted at the Security Council. Our take was that the resolution was illegally implemented. And I think any average lawyer would say it was illegally. Countries overstepped what the resolution said.
And now this lawyer is going to say you have to stop.
Yes, but then we also openly told, and I think someone would remember a meeting we had, we openly told our partners we disagree with what you're doing. We told them so when I accompanied Pink to meet with the NATO ambassadors. We were in London, we were in Rome, and we were open with them. We did not prevail, but history has vindicated our approach. What we said then, and it's written. Now, last point, how we can regain is through what I would call, again, flexibility, agility, and creativity. Even more compelling today than it was before, simply because the political will is not as strong as it was in the early years of the EU. And since Solomon asked me, just could I share a few ideas on what does it mean concretely for Sudan? I don't have, ready-made answers, but I can just think loudly, and maybe what I'm saying is already contemplated by the EU. But for instance, I think aloud. It does not cost money. The AU, ideally, we should deploy a mission in Sudan to protect people, to protect infrastructure. It will take time. But the PAC, I think, did request the AU to think about it, from my understanding, correct? You to prepare a plan. But I think what they should do, in my view, and I suppose they are doing it, is, of course, to consult widely with all parties, with partners, with civil society, because the mere fact of consulting and reporting to the PAC on what the different parties think about it can be used as a leverage, as a pressure point on their readiness or not to cooperate. But in the meantime, nothing prevents the EU from putting in place a remote monitoring mechanism. It doesn't need to be based in Sudan, and call it independent mechanism, and I insist, and I'll explain why. Mandated by the PSC, comprising the Committee of Experts on the Right of Children, comprising the Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security, the Special Envoy on the Prevention of Genocide, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the African Court, and so on, and task it to report on a bi-weekly basis on human rights violations and other abuses in Sudan. And why it is important. Independent means the Commission can have some distance. To report is a way of putting pressure on the parties because the parties would not like to be named, and to report and to name and to leverage it against the parties. It doesn't cost money. All these structures exist. All it needs is the PSC communique to label it as an independent mechanism. 2, and it's something we did in Burkina Faso in 2015. I have seen a communique by the ICGLR requesting labeling or threatening to label or labeling, I think, the RSF as terrorist coup. Again, I'm just listing. But I remember in Burkina Faso in 2015 when there was a coup and wanted to reverse it, we gave the coup makers 48 or 96 hours, I can't remember now, to reverse the coup. Short of it, we're going to label them as terrorists. Of course, one would say just a paper, but no one in his right mind wants to be labeled publicly as a terrorist. So it's a threat you can use against parties to compel them to some moderation. Recommendation number 3. The Malabo Protocol provides for the establishment of an African Court of Justice and Human Rights. And one of the competencies of the court is to try people for crimes of war, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Now, the protocol has not yet entered into force. Only Angola has ratified. But the AU can decide through a summit decision to bring forward some of the provisions and exceptionally to request the African Court to try everyone who may be involved in war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide in Sudan. And again, I can tell you, you don't need to do it immediately. You can say, if this does not stop, we're going to do A, B, C, D. And I'm certain it can change the conversation. Last point, the AU could request the UN panel of experts on sanctions on Sudan to brief the PSC. Because that would send messages. And you don't need, by the way, to say, I endorse what the panel says. All you need in your communique is to say, we were briefed by the panel, and the panel stated 1, 2, 3, 4. Point 4, we request the chairperson of the Commission to engage all actors concerned on these allegations. That also is a way of putting pressure. Again, I'm doing it very briefly. I could probably, if you give me time, I can draft a communique for you, on how this can be done. But the point I'm trying to make, I'm not underestimating the difficulties. But again, I'm saying there is always room for maneuver. And in any event, we have no choice but to be bold and to be creative. Because for us, it's a matter of survival. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan. We are running way against time, but Juan, we are now waiting for your autobiography, in which we hope you will leak more documents in the autobiography so that Africans know what really happened. Thank you. Thank you all, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. I think that I will use my, prerogative standing here to say that we will not have closing remarks because of our right to food, but we will give Dr. Paul Simon Handy, who is the Regional Director for East Africa and representative to the African Union of the Institute of Security Studies, one of the partners of the TFP, just the last word to say a few words and to thank all of you for spending this time with us. And after that, we will go out to the Summerfield restaurant and have some lunch where I hope the conversation will continue.
Thanks a lot. Really, I know I stand between you and the food. I won't abuse this time. I just would like to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. in our industry, 3 decades is a dinosaur age. So TFP is actually a dinosaur. It's one of the few dinosaurs. Accord is one of those dinosaurs. And it's really a testimony to Norway's commitment for long term. I mean, supporting for 30 years without interruption, really that's almost structural support, technical support. But it's also a demonstration of what partnership and co-creation can achieve. I am not going to read my notes, but Parfait just left, actually. But I wanted to respond to his question that he asked us, policy research organizations. What do we do, actually, to make sure that our leaders get to read our papers and that they get the right influence? Yeah, Parfait is coming back, great. And actually, to answer this question, I would like to quote Miriam, your predecessor, the former deputy ambassador of the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands here in Addis. Rule in responding to the claims of think tanks. We all claim that we provide evidence-based knowledge to support decision making. And one day at a meeting, he asked us, who actually told you that leaders wanted evidence-based knowledge? Why do you assume that they want it? In fact, maybe they don't, because it might force them to take the right decisions. So sometimes it's not necessarily the strongest, I mean, at least the ethically and morally strongest argument that prevails, but often a decision is a political compromise. Sometimes it has to be the politically acceptable decision that is taken. As Ambassador Bankole was saying, unfortunately, our leaders hide behind the technical experts today and own a bit lesser the decisions they are taking. So just as an answer to that, Parfait, we try our best, but it doesn't mean that having evidence-based knowledge will necessarily lead to the recommendations we are making. So I really believe in this type of global partnership that TFP has started and has been for the last 30 years, bringing together African and European policy research organizations. And I would really like to end by thanking the Norwegian government for this sustained partnership, but also the TFP partners, Accord, NUPI, ourselves, but the Secretariat as well. Our coordinator is doing a great job, thankless job, Linda, I know, but thanks for the dedication. It does look easy on the outside, but you and me and the others know what it takes to manage such a partnership with, researchers are difficult people. Vasu is difficult. And Linda has always managed the different sensibilities of the different partners with a great sense of professionalism. So thank you very much to all of you for being here, for joining us, celebrating our coming into the dinosaur age. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this brings us to the end of our high-level public seminar. We will be publishing Mr. Wan's notes, and we will make sure that we circulate it widely when that is done. May I invite you now to join us for lunch, where, as I said, the conversation can continue. It is at the Summerfield restaurant. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day and the weekend. Bye-bye for now.